So in this last part of chapter 22, we're going to take a look at some solutions to some of the environmental issues we've been talking about throughout this chapter. We'll look at some things that humans can do and some things that humans are doing to help combat these issues that we're encountering on our planet. One big thing to look at is human resource use. So humans continue to use many of Earth's resources for making products and creating energy. We use lots of things, non-renewable resources, to make things or to make energy. And scientists are concerned that the biosphere has a limited capacity to renew or repair itself from the impacts caused by the heavy use of resources. Some resources, for example, like trees to make things out of the wood. Uh, we might not be able to replant those trees quick enough for the big areas of forest that maybe we're cutting down. We're also, cutting down areas of forest to make ways for buildings and to make ways for farmland. So some of the areas that we're damaging might not be able to repair themselves. So that's something we're looking at. Sustainability refers to the ability to meet human needs in such a way that a human population can survive indefinitely. It really just means being smart about our resources, not wasting things, using only what we need, recycling things. So sustainability is something that we hear a lot about. How can we use resources in a sustainable way? How can we make sure that we have enough energy resources for everybody in the future? How do we make sure we have enough food? Those are things that we're concerned about when we talk about sustainability. The environmental problems that we have been talking about this chapter, they connect across national borders. So, America just doesn't have problems, and then Canada doesn't, and Mexico doesn't. We all have environmental issues, and every country has, different environmental issues. Some of them are the same, and some of them are different. So big environmental issues like climate change, for example, they're going to require worldwide efforts, not just one or a few countries, but the entire world's really going to have to work together for this. Conservation biology, this is where scientists seek to identify, protect, and manage natural areas that still retain much biodiversity. So, for example, the wetlands down like in Florida and Louisiana, there's lots of conservation biology happening there. Scientists working to figure out how can we best protect those areas that are so important for bird migrations and fragile organisms, and important for humans because they help prevent with flood control. So, there are laws that come into play with conservation biology. One of the most famous is the Endangered Species Act, making sure that we're not wiping out different species off the face of the planet, even though it seems to be happening now with the way that the world is changing. So conservation biology is something that's really important and something that we're going to be hearing a lot about in our future. There's also something called restoration biology. This is where scientists deal with extreme cases of ecosystem damage. So, for example, if strip mining takes place and they completely, strip a forest area to get the things underneath the ground, that can damage that area, and then we have to try to restore it to get it back to its natural state. Forest fires are another big one. Once a forest fire breaks out, it takes a really long time for that area to repair itself. Australia, with those big fires we had earlier in the year, that was an example of an area where restoration biology is likely going to have to take place in order to get those areas back to where they were. Oil spills, we see a picture here. That's another big one that happens sometimes. Sometimes, unfortunately, we have some big oil spills out in the ocean. Oil rigs break and get damaged, and they release all this oil into the ocean. Not only does it hurt the fish, but that oil washes up on the beaches and washes up on the land, affects the birds and the turtles and everything that lives in the area, and it kills a lot of them. So in that area that gets covered by oil, there are different restoration teams, like we see here, that have to go out and clean that area up and try to repair it so that wildlife can return there and wildlife can continue to live there. So species and their habitats are interconnected. If the habitat is unhealthy, chances are some of the species are going to be unhealthy because it affects them. Just like we're connected to our environment. If our environment is not healthy, if we don't have clean air and clean water, then we are going to be less healthy. Scientists can look for clues to tell them about the health of an ecosystem. A lot of times scientists will look at bioindicators. A bioindicator is a species that has an especially or a species that is especially sensitive to ecological change. So something like the salamander shown up above, they're very sensitive to the cleanliness of the water and the air that they live in. So if something's going wrong in that area and the water's starting to get polluted or the air's starting to get polluted, salamanders would be a bioindicator. They would be one of the first things that would start to suffer. So if you started to see their population start to decline or get sick, that could be a clue, an indicator to scientists to tell them that, hey, something's going wrong here. Maybe we need to look at the water and see if something's being dumped into it that's starting to poison the salamanders. Maybe something's being released into the air. Other examples might include freshwater mussels in our area. So that's another type of organism that would be very sensitive to change. The decline of these organisms in an ecosystem can warn scientists of pollution and other environmental issues. When it comes to protecting ecosystems, it's really difficult to try to protect everything at once. So usually scientists look for the areas of most concern first, and then they work their way back. So scientists focus on identifying biodiversity hotspots to focus their efforts. A biodiversity hotspot is a region of the biosphere that has been identified by conservationists as having high species diversity and being highly threatened by human impacts. So tropical rainforest would be a big biodiversity hotspot. You have lots of different plants and insects and organisms living there. We would be really concerned about those areas if something were to happen, like if they were to get polluted or a forest fire were to break out. We could lose a lot of species in those areas, and that would eventually affect other areas around the world. So that would be an example of a biodiversity hotspot. Another one would be the oceans. The coral reefs in the ocean. That's an area of concern because there's lots of different organisms that live in those areas of the ocean. And right now they're in decline. Those coral reefs are dying out because the ocean's becoming too warm, becoming too acidic. We're overfishing our ocean. So there's lots of different human impacts in these biodiversity hotspots that scientists are focused on, and hopefully we can change in the future. In the United States, governments at the local, state, and federal levels have used laws to address environmental issues. This includes protecting endangered species and habitats, cleaning up pollution, and regulating destructive activities. So, for example, with our hunting season here, you just can't go out and hunt any time of the year. There are laws about when you can hunt and how many deer or whatever you're hunting you can actually kill. That's something that is, looking at our environment and saying that we need to control that aspect of it. We just can't litter anywhere we want. We have, littering laws. We just can't throw trash wherever you want on the roadside, even though, some of our roadways do look a little dirty because, sometimes people do litter and get away with it. But, we try to keep those areas clean. We try to regulate destructive activities so companies just can't go dump a whole bunch of pollution into our waterways because it's cheap and easy. That can destroy lots of organisms and it can eventually hurt us. International agreements are crucial to solving global environmental problems. A great example of an international agreement was reducing the use of CFCs. Those were the chemicals that destroyed the ozone layer that we found in refrigerants and air conditioners. We reduced the use of those chemicals, and this has slowed the thinning of the ozone layer. So that's something that has actually worked with international agreements. So the world working together. Issues like global warming will likely require more international agreements in the future to solve. So we're going to need countries to work together in order to do this. So that's something you're going to be hearing a lot about as we move through our future. A newer type of way to help deal with issues is called ecotourism. This is a form of tourism that supports the conservation of ecologically unique areas while bringing economic relief benefit to local people. So basically, people will go to these areas that are being conserved or areas that are, fragile, and they will tour that area in a safe way. When they do that, they might pay for nature guides or for lodging in exchange for an experience in an ecosystem that's very unique. So that money that they spend there can help go to raising funds to help protect that area. Also, when you get people to actually see these areas, they tend to appreciate them more. We can talk forever about the tropical rainforest, but none of us can truly appreciate it until we actually go and visit it. That's not always possible, but there are, tourism agencies that are working to get more and more people to look at these areas and actually see how cool they are in person and why it's so important to protect them. So that's ecotourism. Urban ecology is also a new area of ecology that's kind of came about, in the past few decades. This is the study of biodiversity in areas that are densely populated by humans. So we live amongst a lot of wildlife in areas in places like cities, even in our area. You can be an urban ecologist by learning about your local environment. For example, you could find out the names of local birds, how the birds survive, and whether any specific laws protect them. You can learn about where your garbage goes after it's collected, if there are recycling centers nearby, or if a local organization may need volunteers for conservation efforts. So this is something you can even do in our area. I know we have recycling centers around here. A lot of us have, curbside recycling. So that's something that a lot of us probably do that's good for the environment. Um, so these are things that we can do even in our area to help preserve the species and the environment that we live in.